My name is Emilia Clarke, and I'm 42 years old. 7 months ago, my mother-in-law, Patricia Devon, died of a stroke in her sleep. And 6 weeks before that, I revealed a DNA test that shattered everything she had constructed over the last 23 years, her marriage, her identity, her entire claim to the family legacy that had defined our existence. The irony, which I'm sure Patricia would have appreciated in some twisted way, is that she spent decades making me feel small and disposable while standing on a foundation that was literally built on lies. The DNA test wasn't mine. It was hers, and it proved that the golden child she had protected with every ounce of her venomous energy, my brother-in-law Marcus, was not actually her biological son. When the truth came out, my father-in-law Robert collapsed. My husband David stopped speaking to me for 3 weeks. My sister-in-law Monica, Marcus's actual biological sibling, though she didn't know it yet, called me names I'd never heard directed at a woman before. And the family fractured in a way that can never be fully reassembled, like a mirror that's been smashed and hurriedly glued back together in the dark. The pieces fit, technically, but the reflections will never align correctly again. But I need to back up. I need to tell you who I was when I walked into this family, and who Patricia was when she decided I would be her personal project in humiliation. If you've ever been invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to love you, this might resonate. If you've ever worked yourself to the bone trying to prove your worth to someone who had already decided you had none, keep reading. Because what I learned is that the truth doesn't ask permission, and it doesn't care how long you've been protecting someone else's lie. Part 1, The Invisible Years. I met David at a medical conference in 2001. I was 23 years old, freshly graduated from Oxford with a degree in medicine, on my first professional assignment as a junior resident. David was 30, already established in his family's architectural firm, with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having been told no. He was beautiful in that understated British way, expensive shoes, inherited posture, a watch that cost more than my car. He noticed me because I was arguing with a senior physician about the ethics of a particular treatment protocol, and apparently, passion and competence were attractive to him. We dated for 8 months before he brought me home to meet the family. The Devon estate sat in the Cotswolds, 40 minutes from Oxford, a sprawling Georgian mansion that had been in the family for 4 generations. I remember the drive up the tree-lined driveway, gravel crunching under the tires, my hands sweating through my dress. David had been mostly silent about his family, which I should have recognized as a warning sign. Instead, I interpreted it as a sign that they were normal, understated, private, the way wealthy British families are supposed to be. I was so naive. Patricia Devon opened the front door before David could even ring the bell. She was 58 years old then, impeccably dressed in cream, linen despite the fact that it was only 2:30 in the afternoon, her blonde hair arranged in the kind of style that required a salon appointment every 6 weeks. She looked me up and down in a way that took approximately 4 seconds, but felt like an X-ray conducted by a woman who was already preparing her diagnosis. "So," she said, not moving from the doorway to let us inside, "you're the medical student. David mentioned you were clever." "She's already a resident," David said, putting his hand on the small of my back. "She graduated top of her class. Emilia, this is my mother, Patricia." "Resident," Patricia repeated as if the word was distasteful. "How ambitious of you. Come in then, we're having lunch on the terrace." That should have been my first warning, but I was young and eager to please, and I didn't recognize contempt wearing the costume of civility. The lunch was elaborate. Patricia had prepared roasted salmon, homemade salad with microgreens from the conservatory, a white wine that David's father, Robert, kept explaining the provenance of. Robert was kind, I thought then. He asked me questions about my work, remembered details I'd mentioned, smiled warmly. Monica, who was 19 and reading English at Cambridge, was charming in the way beautiful people with advantages can be, interested enough, but with the kind of half-attention that suggested she was perpetually aware of something more important happening in her peripheral vision. And then there was Marcus. Marcus was David's older brother. Well, the oldest, actually, though no one would really acknowledge the significance of that at the table. He was 32, worked in the London office of the architectural firm, and he had the distinctive look of someone who had been told his entire life that he was exceptional. Good-looking in a more severe way than David, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they looked at. He barely acknowledged me beyond a handshake, then spent the meal ignoring me and focusing his attention on Monica, making her laugh with private jokes that clearly went back years. It was Patricia's gaze that I felt most acutely, though. When I spoke about my research, her eyes went somewhere distant. When Robert engaged me in conversation, she found reasons to interrupt. When I complimented the salmon, she mentioned that Monica's boarding school roommate's mother was a chef in Paris. Every single interaction was a test, and I was failing in ways I didn't yet understand. After lunch, Patricia asked me to help her in the kitchen. David started to protest, but I waved him off, still believing then that I could charm my way into acceptance. I was a doctor, I was intelligent, I came from a good family, why wouldn't she like me? Patricia handed me a tea towel and stood so close to me at the sink that I had to fight the instinct to step back. She washed the glasses with methodical precision, and I dried them. The silence stretched like something living between us. David is a very important young man, she said finally, not looking at me. He has responsibilities, family responsibilities. The firm needs him, we need him. He's never had to think about what he wanted before, and I'd like him to continue in that pattern. It's better for everyone that way. I remember not knowing how to respond, so I just dried the glass in my hand and set it carefully on the counter. Are you planning to continue with this medical career? She asked. Yes, I said, it's what I've always wanted to do. How inconvenient, Patricia said. She finally looked at me and I saw no warmth in her eyes, only a kind of clinical assessment, the way you might look at a specimen you'd already decided was contaminated. Wives have a difficult time managing full-time careers and supporting ambitious husbands. The marriage usually suffers. It's a known fact. I don't think marriage would stop me from working, I said, and I can hear in the memory of that sentence how young I was, how earnest, how confidently ignorant. Patricia smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. How interesting. Well, I suppose you'll find out soon enough. She never said another kind thing to me after that day, not in 23 years. Part 2, the long diminishment. David and I married 2 years later in 2003. It was a small wedding which Patricia insisted on because, and I quote, anything more ostentatious would be inappropriate given David's position in the firm. What she meant was that she wanted the wedding to be about the Devon family legacy and not about me. My parents felt sidelined. My mother cried at the reception, but not from happiness. She could feel the coldness radiating from Patricia even then. We moved to London, to a flat in Knightsbridge that David's family owned. It makes no sense for you to pay rent, Robert had said, and I'd been grateful for the gesture. I didn't realize at the time that accepting their generosity was another chain being wrapped around me, slowly enough that I wouldn't notice until I couldn't get free. I was 30 hours a week at St. Mary's Hospital, and 30 hours a week in the Devon family drama that I was somehow supposed to manage alongside a medical career. Patricia called constantly. She needed David for family dinners. She wanted to discuss the renovation of the guest house. She had opinions about the flat we lived in, about how I decorated it, about the friends I made. She had opinions about my clothes, my career, my ambitions. Shouldn't you be thinking about children? She asked when I was 27 and in the middle of a particularly demanding rotation. Women doctors have such a difficult time becoming pregnant after their late 20s. It's a biological reality. I'm 27, I said. Exactly, Patricia said. Exactly. David tried in his way to defend me. He would tell me that she was just concerned, that she expressed herself in a particular way, that if I could just understand the pressures on her, Marcus's career, the family firm, her responsibility as the matriarch, I would see that her comments came from a place of care. But I could feel him shifting away from me degree by degree, like the continental plates moving. He spent more time at the office. He attended more family events without me. When I challenged Patricia's behavior, he became quietly withdrawn, and I learned that preventing conflict was more important to him than preventing my hurt. Meanwhile, Monica had left Cambridge and was doing something vague in London, PR or possibly marketing. Her focus wavered. She was stunning and clever in ways that made people forgive her for being inconsistent. She was also the golden child in a way that Marcus, despite his position in the firm, had never quite managed to be. Monica got her mother's charm and her father's genuine warmth, a combination that made her beloved by everyone who met her. Marcus was something else entirely. There was something wrong between Marcus and Patricia, something unspoken but constantly present. She was protective of him in a way that seemed almost desperate, as if she was constantly trying to prove something to him or to the world about him. She would brag about his work with an intensity that bordered on manic, then go cold when he didn't meet some invisible standard. He rarely visited the house. When he did, they barely spoke, though I could feel the tension between them like weather moving across the room. I never understood it then. I had no idea I would eventually understand it intimately. The years passed. I advanced through my residency. I became a surgical resident, then a fellow. I was working toward a career in reconstructive and cosmetic surgery, a field that required intense focus and dedication. I loved the work. I loved the precision of it, the way a scalpel could fix things that seemed broken. I loved walking into an operating room at 6 in the morning and emerging 12 hours later having literally changed someone's life. I was good at my job. I was becoming great at my job. And I was making almost no money compared to the Devon family wealth, which Patricia never let me forget. "At least you're keeping busy," she would say, in a tone that suggested she found my busyness pathetic rather than admirable. "Though I do wonder what the point is, when David is more than capable of providing for you. Many women in your position would recognize that they're fortunate enough to step back and focus on what matters." What matters, in Patricia's worldview, was children and family management. The fact that I had my own definition of what mattered was something she treated as a character flaw. By 2008, I had advanced far enough in my career to be offered a position at a prestigious private clinic. The money was good, finally. I was 30 years old, accomplished, building something real. I was proud of myself. I remember wearing the offer letter home like armor, ready to show David, ready to have something to set against Patricia's constant implication that I was a disappointment. But something was shifting in our marriage. David was distant. He was spending more time with Marcus, who by then had moved into increasingly prominent positions in the firm. David was always talking about expansion plans, about developing properties in Dubai, about how exciting and demanding Marcus found it all. Meanwhile, I was barely seeing my husband. We were two people living in the same flat, following parallel schedules, going through the motions of intimacy without any of the actual connection. I brought it up, of course I did. I was trained to identify problems and solve them. "We're just busy," David said, standing in the kitchen in the same flat his family owned, reading his email on his phone instead of looking at me. "This is what it's like being married to ambitious people. We'll have time later." "When?" I asked. "When exactly later, David? Because I feel like I'm losing you and I don't know how to stop it." "You're not losing me," he said, but he still didn't look at me. "I'm right here." But he wasn't. He was somewhere else entirely, and I had no idea where. In September 2008, I miscarried. I was pregnant and I didn't tell anyone because I was waiting for the right moment, waiting until after my first month at the new clinic, waiting for some mythical time when everything felt solid enough to share. I was 11 weeks along, past the point where most people wait, and I was in a cab heading to the hospital when I started bleeding. There was a moment, suspended in the London traffic, where I understood what was happening, and I called David. He was in a meeting. He called me back 2 hours later, after I was already in hospital, after I'd already been examined by colleagues who knew me, who were professionally distant in a way that felt kind. "Are you okay?" he asked when he finally called back. "No," I said. "I'm not okay. I was pregnant, David. I was pregnant and now I'm not, and I'm alone in a hospital bed and I don't understand what happened." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "I didn't know you were pregnant," he said finally. "I was going to tell you," I said. "I was going to tell you after I got to the new clinic. I was trying to get my footing." "You should have told me immediately," he said, and there was something in his voice that I couldn't identify. Not anger exactly, something colder than anger, something more like disappointment. He didn't come to the hospital that night. He came the next morning, brought flowers that he set on the chair instead of the bedside table, and he looked at me like I was a problem he didn't know how to solve. "It's one of those things," he said. "It happens. We can try again when you're ready." "I don't know if I'm ready," I said. "I don't know what I am right now." "You're you," he said. "You're Emilia, you'll be fine, you're always fine." But I wasn't fine. I was broken, and it wasn't just about the pregnancy. It was about the fact that I was breaking, and the person who was supposed to catch me was looking at his watch, calculating when he could get back to the office. Patricia called 2 days later. David must have told her. She asked if I was feeling better, and when I said I was still in the hospital and devastated, she made a small disappointed sound. "Well," she said, "I suppose there's no point in worrying about what we can't control. You'll have other chances if you need them. Though honestly, Emilia, between the career and the medical trauma, I'm not sure how good a mother you would have been anyway." I hung up the phone, and I didn't call back. Part 3, The Architecture of Betrayal. For the next 10 years I poured everything into my work. I didn't have a choice, really. Work was the only thing that made sense anymore. Work was the only place where I had control, where my competence was recognized, where I wasn't constantly diminished by the gravitational pull of Devon family politics. My marriage continued, but it became less a marriage and more a cohabitation agreement. We had sex approximately once a month. We had dinner together perhaps twice a week. We didn't fight because fighting would have required engagement, and David had moved so far away from me that he barely seemed to see me anymore. When he looked at me, I saw pity, as if I was a woman who had failed to become what she was supposed to be. In 2011, I became the youngest consultant surgeon at my clinic. I published research on reconstruction techniques for burn victims. I was invited to speak at international conferences. I was building something real and meaningful, something that would outlast me, something that helped people. And still, Patricia found ways to diminish it. "How nice for you," she would say, when I mentioned a conference or a publication. "Though I suppose it must be lonely, spending so much time focused on your work. Most women at your age are thinking about their families." The implication was always clear. My ambition was a character defect. My success was a sign that I wasn't fulfilled. My career was the reason my marriage was failing, not David's emotional abandonment, not Patricia's toxicity, not the fundamental incompatibility that we had never actually addressed. Monica, meanwhile, had become engaged to a man named James who worked in finance, had a house in Surrey, and took Monica on expensive holidays. Patricia threw herself into wedding planning with the kind of manic energy that suggested the event was not just about Monica's happiness, but about Patricia's public validation. Monica would be a society bride. She would have the kind of wedding that appeared in magazines. Monica was doing everything right. And I was not. Then in 2016, something shifted. I was 42 years old. No, wait, I was 38 years old then. I'm trying to keep track of time while telling this story, and it's harder than I expected. Time moves differently when you're remembering trauma. Sometimes it stretches, sometimes it collapses. I was 38 years old, and I was invited to present my research at the World Conference on Reconstructive Surgery in Geneva. It was a massive honor. My paper had been accepted as a keynote presentation. Major surgeons from around the world would be in the audience. This was the kind of moment that could define a career, that could open doors to research funding and international collaborations. I was terrified and exhilarated. David was working on a massive project in Dubai. He had been commuting back and forth for months, spending more time in the Gulf than in London. He had barely mentioned it to me before he was gone, and I didn't ask many questions. I had learned not to ask. I was preparing my presentation, had been working on it for weeks, refining slides, rehearsing the delivery when Monica called me. "I'm getting married," she said. "I know," I said, "June Wright, the Hampshire estate." "I'm getting married in 2 weeks," she said. "We're doing it small, just family. James's parents are thrilled. Mother is obviously having a breakdown, but in an efficient way. She's calling it an intimate celebration." 2 weeks, Monica, I have the conference in Geneva. I'm presenting next month. "Yes, well," Monica said, and I could hear in her voice the exact same dismissive tone that Patricia always used. "Life doesn't always wait for our schedules, does it?" But I couldn't go. I had committed to this presentation. I had spent 6 months preparing. I couldn't just abandon it because Monica had decided to get married on an accelerated timeline. I tried to explain this to David when he called that night. He was in a Dubai hotel room, it was late. He sounded tired and irritated by the time difference. "My sister is getting married," he said. "I know, but my presentation—" "Your presentation will be there next month," he said. "Monica is getting married in 2 weeks. This matters to my family, Emilia." "My career matters too," I said. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "Apparently," he said, "it matters more." He hung up, and that was the beginning of the end of my marriage, though I didn't know it yet. I went to the conference. I presented my research. I won an award for the most innovative presentation. I stood in front of 300 of the most respected surgeons in the world, and I delivered a presentation that was technically perfect and intellectually brilliant. And I missed my sister-in-law's wedding. When I returned to London, I went straight to the Devon house. I don't know why. I think I was still trying to fix things, still operating under the belief that if I could just explain myself well enough, if I could just make them understand, they would see my perspective. Patricia opened the door. She was wearing the same cream linen that she always wore, as if she had been waiting for me. The conference was more important than family, she said, not as a question. The conference was something I've worked toward for months, I said. I presented to 300 surgeons, I won an award. How nice for you, Patricia said. We're all so proud. You've really prioritized your career beautifully over the people who care about you. I imagine that's a choice you'll continue to make. It wasn't about choosing my career over family, I said. I can do both. I can be accomplished and part of the family. No, Patricia said very clearly, you can't. That's what I've been trying to tell you for 13 years. Some women can do both, but they're better at one than the other, and they choose accordingly. You've made your choice. We've all accepted it. She closed the door. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, finally, as if she had been waiting for the moment when she could prove to herself that I was exactly what she had always believed me to be, a person who would always choose herself. I stood on the steps of the Devon house for a long time. I remember looking at the gardens, which Patricia had maintained for 40 years, every plant in its proper place, every hedge trimmed into geometric precision, and I understood in a way I hadn't before that I was never going to be acceptable to her, not because of anything I did or didn't do, but because she needed me to be unacceptable. She needed me to be a cautionary tale about ambition, a demonstration of what happened when women got ideas above their station. I had been so focused on trying to become someone she could love that I had forgotten to ask whether she was capable of love at all. Part 4, The Long Silence. David came back from Dubai 3 weeks later. He called me at the clinic and asked if I could come home early. I did, because even after everything, when he asked, I came. That's what 13 years of marriage teaches you. When someone asks, you show up. You keep showing up even when they're leaving. He was sitting in our living room, in the flat his family owned, with 2 cups of tea on the side table, both of them cold. I've been thinking a lot, he said. Okay, I said. I sat down, but not next to him. I sat in the chair across from him, the way a therapist sits, creating distance between speaker and listener. I don't think this is working, he said. He was looking at his hands. I don't think it's been working for a long time. I know, I said. I've known for years. He looked up at me, surprised that I didn't argue. I think, he continued carefully, that we want different things. You want a career, you want to be successful. Those are good things, but they're not compatible with what I want. Which is, I asked. A wife, he said. A traditional wife. Someone who wants to be at home, who wants to be part of the family, who wants to make that the center of her life. That's not who I am, I said. I know, he said. And I think, probably, you deserve to be with someone who appreciates who you are, and I deserve to be with someone who wants what I want. It was the kindest thing he'd said to me in years. It was also the most devastating because it meant he had given up. He wasn't asking me to change. He was just accepting that I wouldn't and that we were fundamentally incompatible. Are you asking for a divorce? I asked. I think, he said, that's the most honest thing we could do. And that was it. 13 years of marriage dissolved in a conversation that took approximately 12 minutes. He cried, I think, or came very close to it. I was past crying. I was in the place beyond grief where you just accept that something is broken and it's not going to be fixed. He left 3 days later. He moved into a house that the firm had in Mayfair. His mother, Patricia, did not call me to express sympathy. She called David at the Mayfair house, according to what I heard later, and told him that it was the right decision. I didn't fight him on the divorce. I didn't ask for the flat, even though I'd paid for significant renovations out of my own salary. I didn't ask for spousal support. I just wanted out. I wanted to stop existing in a space where every object was a reminder of my failure to become someone's dutiful wife. I moved into a small apartment in Bethnal Green, a place I could afford with my salary, a place that had no history in it. I put a bed and a desk and a sofa and very little else. I deleted the photos of the family from my phone. I took Patricia's number out of my contacts. I made a choice very deliberately to stop trying. That was in 2016. For the next 3 years I barely saw any of them. David remarried in 2017. Her name was Charlotte, and she was the daughter of a prominent banker. She didn't work. She was, by all accounts, exactly what Patricia had always wanted for her son, a woman who understood her place, who was content to be decorative and supportive, who didn't have ambitions that competed with her husband's. Monica had 2 children and was living in Surrey with James, appearing in society magazines at charity events. Marcus had been promoted to managing partner of the firm. Robert was slowing down but still involved in family business decisions. And I was alone, which I found, somewhat to my surprise, was not the worst thing that could happen to a person. I had friendships that deepened when I wasn't dividing my attention between my marriage and my career. I had mentors at the clinic, older surgeons who recognized in me something worth cultivating. I had a research team that included people who respected my work and challenged my thinking. I had a life that was entirely my own, and while it was sometimes lonely, it was never diminishing. I was, for the first time in my adult life, becoming myself. In 2019, I was asked to take on the role of Chief of Reconstructive Surgery at a major London hospital. It was the position I'd been working toward my entire career. It came with significant administrative responsibility, teaching opportunities, and research funding. It was the culmination of everything I'd sacrificed for. I gave a presentation about my career goals at a medical conference. A photo from that presentation ended up in a medical journal that Patricia, for reasons I still don't understand, apparently subscribed to. She cut it out and sent it to me with a handwritten note. "At least you finally have a husband who doesn't leave. Congratulations." I stared at that note for a long time, and then I filed it in a folder marked evidence that I was right about everything. Part 5, the seismic shift. In March 2023, I received a call at work that would change everything. It was Robert. His voice was thin, wavering, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. He had had a heart attack that morning. Patricia was at the hospital with him. They were asking if I could come. I know, after everything, they called me, and the most important thing is I came. I didn't think about whether they deserved my help. I didn't think about all the years of diminishment or the divorce or the note about finding a husband. I thought about Robert, who had always been kind to me, who had always seen me, who had treated me like a person and not a problem. I grabbed my bag and I left the clinic and I went to the hospital. Patricia was in the waiting room and she looked like someone had removed her scaffolding. She was still, which was wrong. Patricia was never still. She was always moving, always orchestrating, always performing. But there in that waiting room, she was just a woman who was terrified that she was losing her husband. She saw me and for a moment something shifted in her face. It looked like relief, but it couldn't be. Patricia didn't feel relief at my presence. She had made that clear for 2 decades. "He asked for you," she said. "I told him you wouldn't come, but he asked for you anyway." I went to Robert's room. He was in a hospital bed, looking smaller than I remembered, with monitors tracking his heartbeat and his oxygen levels. He reached for my hand when he saw me. "You came," he said. "Of course I came," I said, "and I meant it. Despite everything, I meant it." "I wanted to see you before he started, but he couldn't finish the sentence." "You're going to be fine," I said in the voice I use with patience, the voice that conveys absolute confidence. "You're going to recover. We're going to get you through this." But we didn't. Robert died 3 days later. He had a second heart attack at night, and by the time the nurses called for the medical team, it was too late. I was at the hospital when it happened. I was in the surgeon's lounge, and the page came through, and I knew, with the specific knowledge of someone who had spent a career understanding the body's failures, that his heart had simply given up. I didn't cry immediately. I went to David first at the hospital and I told him what had happened. I watched his face break in real time, and I saw something I hadn't seen in 6 years. My husband, the boy I had married, the person I had tried so hard to love. And then it closed again, and he was David from the divorce papers, cordial and distant. I went to see Patricia. She was in a room with medical staff being offered sedatives and privacy. She saw me and she didn't say anything. She just made a sound, a small broken sound, and I realized that she was collapsing. I held her hand for 4 hours while she processed the fact that the man she had been married to for 43 years was gone. I didn't think about what she had done to me. I thought about Robert, who had never been unkind, who had loved her despite her fundamental capacity for cruelty. "It's my fault," Patricia said at one point. "I was difficult, I was controlling. He would have been happier if I'd been different." "That's not true," I said, and I meant it. "Robert loved you, he knew who you were, and he loved you anyway." "Why did you come?" she asked. "When I called, I expected you to refuse." I didn't have a good answer. I just said, "Because you called, because he asked for me." Patricia looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "I've been terrible to you," she said. "For 20 years I've been deliberately, methodically cruel to you, and you came when we asked." "Yes," I said. "Why?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe because being cruel back wouldn't help anyone." Part 6. What she was protecting. The memorial service was held at the Devon house, in the gardens that Patricia had tended for decades. All of the extended family came. David's cousins, Robert's siblings, Monica's children, Marcus with a woman I didn't recognize who was apparently his girlfriend. 200 people coming to say goodbye to a man who had been quietly present in every one of their lives. I wore black. I stood at the back of the gathering. I didn't speak, but I was there and everyone noticed. The looks were complicated. Some were grateful, some were confused. Some, particularly from Monica, were frankly hostile. After the service, after the food had been cleared and the guests had left, Patricia asked me to stay. She asked me to walk in the gardens with her, the way we never had in 20 years. We walked past the hedge mazes that Robert had insisted on planting, past the rose garden that Patricia had designed, past the small stone bench where Robert liked to sit and read the newspaper. "I need to tell you something," Patricia said, "and I need to ask you to keep it in confidence, not for my sake, but for the sake of people I love." "Okay," I said. "Marcus is not David's brother," she said. "He's David's half-brother, and Monica is not actually his full sister. They share a mother but different fathers." I stopped walking. "What?" "When Robert and I were first married," Patricia continued, not looking at me, "he had an affair. It was early on, before David was born. The woman became pregnant. Robert wanted to do the right thing. He wanted to acknowledge the child. He wanted to help her." "Marcus," I said. "Marcus," Patricia confirmed. "Robert was a good man, Emilia. He was a good man, and he was young, and he made a mistake, and he spent his entire life trying to make up for it. He brought Marcus into this family. He made sure he had every advantage. He made sure he felt like he belonged, even though he didn't, not entirely." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I kept this secret," Patricia said, "to protect the family, to protect Robert's reputation, to protect my own pride. And it's been the most exhausting, destructive thing I've ever done. Robert died thinking he hadn't done enough to make things right with Marcus. David grew up thinking his older brother was someone he should compete with. Monica grew up without understanding why her relationship with Marcus was always so complex. And I spent 43 years being a guardian of something that was eating us all alive from the inside." She sat down on the stone bench and she looked so small, so much smaller than she ever had before. "I was cruel to you," she said, "because you represented everything that I was afraid of. You were ambitious. You didn't accept your place. You didn't prioritize being a wife the way I told myself I should. And it infuriated me because part of me was jealous of you. Part of me had always wanted to be something more than a woman whose primary function was to maintain a family's reputation." "Patricia," I started. "Let me finish," she said. "I was cruel to you to make sure you understood what happened when you prioritized yourself. I was cruel to you because I needed the world to be as small and limited as I had made it for myself. If you could be ambitious and happy, then that was evidence that my choices hadn't been necessary, that I could have been something more." I sat down next to her. "I thought," she continued, "that if I made David unhappy enough, he would come back to me. If I made sure his marriage to you failed, he would understand that I was the person he should be loyal to. That's not rational, I know, but I've spent my entire life managing men's emotions and family legacies, and I didn't know any other way to be." "You sabotaged my marriage," I said. "I did," Patricia said. "I was deliberate about it. I turned David against you by implying that your ambition was selfish. I made you feel unwelcome in the family so that you would eventually leave or become so diminished that you disappeared entirely. I was punishing you for being something I wished I had been brave enough to become." We sat in silence for a long time. The sun was going down and the gardens were turning golden in the late afternoon light. "There's something else," Patricia said. David and we've known for years that there was something wrong with the family's genetic history. Robert always said so, but I dismissed it. There were genetic markers that didn't match. Hair color, eye color, some medical conditions that ran on his side that shouldn't have. Marcus, I said again. Marcus, yes, but also Monica. Robert's father had hemophilia, a bleeding disorder. It runs in families. Monica carries it. David carries the carrier status. But Marcus doesn't carry any of the markers. He's not genetically related to Robert at all. And his biological father's family history shows recessive traits that Marcus has expressed. How do you know this? I asked. Because I did a DNA test, Patricia said. About 5 years ago, just for myself, one of those ancestry services, and it came back with unexpected relatives, half-siblings I didn't know about, and when I looked into it I realized what had happened. Robert's affair, the woman involved, her name came up in my results. She had submitted DNA, and her son's results were in the database. You found Marcus's biological father, I said. I found him, Patricia said. He's a man named Charles Winters. He's a professor of medical ethics at Oxford. Marcus doesn't know. David doesn't know. Monica doesn't know. Only Robert and I knew, and now only I know. Why didn't you tell them? I asked. Because, Patricia said, it wasn't mine to tell. It was Robert's truth, and he had made peace with it. He had built a life with Marcus. Marcus had built his identity in this family. I had no right to blow that apart, and I was protecting myself too, if I'm being honest. I was protecting the narrative I'd constructed about my marriage, about my commitment, about my loyalty. She turned to look at me. But I'm not protecting anything anymore, she said. I'm tired and I'm old, and Robert is gone, and all of the things I was protecting for so long are just dust now. So I'm telling you, Emilia, because you deserve to know why I treated you the way I did. Part 7, the revelation. I didn't do anything with the information immediately. I let it sit in my mind for days, turning it over like a stone in my hand, examining it from every angle. Patricia died on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks later. She had another stroke in her sleep, quick and clean, the way her doctors said was the best possible way to go. David called me to tell me. Monica called me. Even Marcus reached out to express his condolences as if I was family, which technically I was, even if in name only. At the funeral, I watched Marcus stand next to David, the two of them united in their grief in a way that felt performative. They looked similar, both tall, both with the same architectural bearing, ironic, given the family business. But now that I knew the truth, I could see the differences. Marcus had colouring that came from a different lineage. His features, when you looked closely, were distinct from David's in ways that went beyond normal family variation. I could see the secret written in his DNA, and no one else could. After the funeral, after everyone had gone, after the Devon house had been sorted, and Patricia's affairs had been handled by a lawyer, her will was extraordinarily neat, organised with the same precision she'd brought to everything else. I did something I had never done before. I called David. I need to speak with you, I said. In person, it's about something Patricia told me. He sounded wary, and I didn't blame him. We barely spoke, and now I was asking for a meeting that sounded ominous. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital. David looked tired. The divorce had aged him in ways I hadn't expected. He was only 48, but he looked older, like someone was slowly extracting something essential from him. Your mother told me something before she died, I said. About Marcus, about his biological parentage. I watched his face shift. He already knew. I understood from that shift that David already knew. She told you? He asked. She never told me. She only told Father years ago, and Father made her promise not to tell any of us. She was protecting the family narrative, I said. But before she died, she told me everything. About Marcus's biological father, about the DNA test, about her regret at keeping it secret. Why are you telling me this? David asked. Because, I said, Patricia spent her entire life protecting secrets that were poisoning everyone. She kept this secret to protect Robert's reputation. But the cost of that protection was that Marcus never got to know his actual biological family. You never got to have a real relationship with your brother, because there was this massive elephant in the room that no one could name. And I was blamed for things that were never actually my fault, because Patricia was so busy maintaining control over everyone that she couldn't afford to let anyone be imperfect. You're saying this is why she was cruel to you? David asked. Because of Marcus. I'm saying that Patricia's entire relationship with the truth was distorted by her need to control narratives, I said. And I think Marcus deserves to know the truth about his parentage. I think he deserves to choose whether to reach out to his biological father or not. I think you deserve to know your actual family history. And I think we all deserve to stop living in the shadow of Patricia's secrets. David was quiet for a long time. If I tell Marcus, he said, it will destroy him. He's built his entire identity on being a Devon. It will change everything he believes about himself. Maybe, I said, or maybe it will free him. Maybe there's something on the other side of that truth that's better than what he has now. And you want to do this? Why exactly? David asked. You have no stake in this, you could just keep Patricia's secret. Because, I said, I spent 20 years being kept in the dark by your mother. I spent 20 years trying to understand why I was being treated like I was fundamentally wrong, when the real problem was that Patricia was terrified of the truth. And I'm not going to be complicit in that kind of deception. David rubbed his face. I need to think about this. Okay, I said, but don't think for too long because I'm going to tell him, not immediately, not out of anger, but if you don't, I will. And I'll do it in a way that honors his right to know and that honors Robert's memory and that stops treating truth like it's something dangerous. You're serious, he said. I'm completely serious, I said. This ends with me. Part 8, the collision. I didn't tell Marcus immediately. I gave David 4 weeks to decide how he wanted to handle it, and in those 4 weeks I had the strangest experience of my career as a surgeon. I was doing a reconstructive surgery on a woman who had been in a severe car accident. She had facial lacerations, a broken jaw, reconstruction needed on the entire left side of her face. It was delicate work, precise work, the kind of surgery that requires absolute focus and presence. Her name was Sarah. She was 42 years old. She kept asking me if I could make her beautiful again, and I kept telling her that beautiful was a much less important thing than functional, that I could definitely make her face work properly, and that the rest would come with healing. Midway through the surgery, David called. I told him, the anesthesiologist told me, taking the call because I obviously couldn't. David called, said it was urgent, said something about Marcus. I kept operating, I had no choice. Sarah's face was open to the world, and my hands were the only thing keeping her safe. I couldn't leave her. I couldn't even let the distraction change the pressure or angle of my work. For 3 hours, I continued the surgery, while my entire personal universe was presumably collapsing. When I finished, when I had stitched the last suture and stepped back from the table, I called David immediately. He didn't answer. I called Marcus. He did, and his voice when he picked up was something I'd never heard from him before. He sounded destroyed. Did you tell him? He asked. No preamble, just the question. David told him, I said. I didn't get the chance. Where are you? I'm driving, he said. I'm driving to Oxford. There's a man at the university, Charles Winters. And I'm going to ask him if he's my father. Marcus. He is, Marcus said with absolute certainty. I know he is because it makes so much sense now. All the things that never fit. The way father treated me differently. The way mother was so desperate to prove my loyalty. I've been living in a gap between 2 families my entire life, and I never understood why. What did David say? I asked. He said he'd known for a while, that father made mother keep it quiet, that he was sorry that he should have told me years ago, very David, very rational about something catastrophic. Are you okay? I asked. There was a long silence. No, Marcus said, but I will be, I think I will be. I think knowing the truth is better than living in a lie, don't you think? I do, I said. I absolutely think that. He found Charles Winters at Oxford. They went out for tea, which seems impossibly civilized for a meeting that would redefine someone's entire sense of identity, but that's what happened. And according to what David told me later, Charles cried. He had never known that Patricia Devon had found him. He had respected Robert's decision to keep Marcus and had never interfered with the family arrangement. But he had wondered, his whole life, what had happened to his son. Marcus chose to know him. Within a month, he was spending weekends in Oxford, learning about his biological father's family, discovering siblings he'd never known about. He discovered that Charles's family had a genetic predisposition toward excellence in medicine and music and mathematics. He discovered that his own intense drive came, in part, from a lineage he'd never known existed. and the family fractured, because Monica couldn't handle the fact that her relationship with Marcus was based on a lie, because David became withdrawn again, processing his own sense of betrayal that his parents had kept this secret, because I was blamed universally for destroying the family's stability. Monica's first call to me was scathing. "You had no right," she said. "No right to blow apart 20 years of family stability for what, exactly? Moral superiority? Do you feel good about yourself?" "I didn't tell him," I said. "David did." "Because you forced David's hand," she said. "You gave him an ultimatum. You destroyed everything, and for what? For some principle." "For the truth," I said. "The truth doesn't matter if it ruins people," she said. "Marcus is having a breakdown. Father's legacy is destroyed. The family is in pieces, and you did that. You who were never even really part of this family in the first place. You took something that was fragile and you shattered it because you couldn't handle your feelings about Mother." I didn't argue with her. There was no point. She had already decided what the narrative was. I was a vengeful woman who had destroyed the family out of spite for Patricia's unkindness. And maybe, in some small way, she was right. Part 9, The Aftermath. Marcus didn't return to work for 3 months. He didn't respond to emails. He didn't show up to meetings. According to what I heard through David, who heard it through colleagues, Marcus was having what could only be described as an identity crisis. He was processing the fact that his entire sense of self had been predicated on a lie. He was grieving for a father who wasn't his biological father, but who had loved him more than any biological father could have. He was learning about a man who was biologically his father but who he'd never met. He was angry and grief-stricken and lost. The family blamed me. It was particularly vicious because they couldn't admit that they blamed me for telling the truth. Instead, they blamed me for the truth being spoken, for not letting sleeping dogs lie, for being too ambitious, too uncompromising, too much of a woman who thought she knew better. Patricia's ashes were scattered in the garden of the Devon house. I wasn't invited to the ceremony, but I heard about it because David's cousin told a colleague at the hospital who mentioned it to someone who worked with me. I continued my work at the hospital. I continued my research. I continued building the life that I had constructed for myself after the divorce, and I tried very hard not to think about the fact that in trying to free Marcus from a lie, I had apparently destroyed his entire sense of identity. 3 months into Marcus's absence from work, I received a letter. It was handwritten, on heavy cream paper, in Marcus's precise architect's handwriting. "Emilia," it read, "I've been thinking about what you did and why you did it, and I've come to some conclusions. You're right, the truth matters. Living in a lie was destructive and I just couldn't see it from inside the lie. I thought I was fine, but I was living in a constant state of cognitive dissonance. Every achievement had a small asterisk next to it. Every family moment had a layer of uncertainty. I was fundamentally untethered, and I didn't even know it. My therapist, yes, I'm in therapy, which is another thing that seems to have horrified my family, says that I was essentially living someone else's life, the life that Patricia and Robert had constructed for me, and while their intentions were good, the fundamental dishonesty of it was poisonous. Charles is a good man, he's kind and he's interested in knowing me. I have siblings I didn't know about who are generous and real. I'm still angry, I'm still grieving, I'm still processing the fact that my father wasn't my father. But I'm also, for the first time, living in a life that's actually mine, built on truth rather than scaffolding. You told me that knowing the truth would be better than living in a lie. And you were right. It's worse in many ways, but it's better in the ways that matter. I'm going back to work next week. I'm going to rebuild my relationship with David, which is going to take time and therapy. I'm going to navigate my relationship with my biological father's family. I'm going to live a life that's complicated and real, instead of a life that was simple and false. And I want you to know that I don't blame you. I understand why everyone else does, but I don't. You gave me the truth, and the truth is a gift, even when it doesn't feel like one. Thank you, Marcus. I read that letter at least 20 times. I kept it on my desk at the hospital, in a drawer that I opened whenever I was second-guessing my decision to tell the truth. Part 10, The Real Reconciliation. Marcus did go back to work. Within 6 months, he was travelling to Oxford regularly to spend time with Charles and his half-siblings. Within a year, he had restructured his role at the family firm to allow more flexibility. And within 2 years, he had started his own architectural practice, focused on designing medical facilities and therapeutic spaces, drawing on his new understanding of what the human psyche needed to feel safe and present. David and I didn't reconcile exactly, but we became something else. We became two people who had been married, who had hurt each other, who had made mistakes, and who were now slowly, carefully learning to navigate the same family spaces without pretending we were anything other than what we were. People who didn't work together, but who could respect each other's journeys. Monica, it turned out, was far more affected by the truth about Marcus than I had understood. She had built her identity, in many ways, on being the legitimate child in a family where everyone else had secrets. She had structured her marriage, her parenting, her entire life around propriety and legitimacy, and doing things the right way. When she found out that her legitimacy wasn't the defining thing about her that she thought it was, she spiraled. She entered therapy. She started asking questions about her own life that she had been avoiding. She realized that she had spent 20 years trying to be Patricia, controlling, perfect, managing everything and everyone around her, and she didn't want to be Patricia anymore. 2 years after Patricia's death, 5 months after Marcus's revelation, I received a call from Monica. "I'm sorry," she said without preamble. "I'm calling to apologize for everything I said after the truth came out. I was scared, and I was angry, and I blamed you for destroying the family when actually the family was already destroyed. Patricia and Robert and David had been lying for decades, and I was so invested in believing that we were different, that we were better, that we were honest. When you revealed the truth, I had to face the fact that I had been just as complicit in the lie as anyone else. I didn't know what to say. I had prepared myself for a lifetime of being blamed by Monica. I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I don't expect us to suddenly be close, but I needed you to know that I understand now. And I respect what you did, even though it was painful." "Thank you for saying that," I said. "Can we have coffee?" she asked. "Just once, to acknowledge that we've both survived the destruction of the family we thought we had, and maybe there's something to build on that foundation." So we had coffee. It was awkward in ways that I can't fully describe. We were two women who had been forced into each other's lives by David's marriage, who had never actually bonded, who had spent 20 years in a relationship defined by Patricia's hostility and Monica's complicity. But we sat across from each other at a cafe in Bethnal Green, and we talked about our marriages, about parenthood, about the ways that Patricia's control had shaped us both. "I was terrified of becoming like her," Monica said at one point. "So I became exactly like her. I was controlling with my children. I was critical of my husband. I demanded that everything be perfect. And it wasn't until the family fell apart that I realized I was just recreating her pattern, slightly adjusted for my generation." "Patricia was terrified too," I said. "She spent her entire life defending a lie because she thought if the lie was exposed, she would lose everything. But what she didn't understand is that the lie was already costing her everything. She was just so invested in protecting it that she couldn't see the damage it was causing." "Is that why she was cruel to you?" Monica asked. "Because you represented the possibility of something other than what she had chosen?" "I think so," I said. "I think I reminded her of who she might have been if she'd had the courage to be herself, and she couldn't forgive me for that." Monica cried during that conversation, not dramatically, just tears rolling down her face while she stirred her coffee, and I realized that we had both been casualties of Patricia's need to control the narrative. We started having dinner, not frequently but regularly. We went to each other's children's events, we called on birthdays. We didn't become best friends, but we became something like sisters who had endured the same trauma and were learning to heal. Part 11, the four-plate moment. 3 years after Patricia's death, David called me with an invitation. "I'm having a family dinner," he said. "At the Devon house. I'm renovating the kitchen and I want to have the family there to celebrate. I'm inviting you." "Should I come?" I asked. "Yes," David said. "I think it's time." I had barely been to the Devon house in 5 years. It had been extensively renovated under David's direction. The kitchen Patricia had so carefully maintained was gone, replaced with something more modern but still respectful to the house's history. The gardens were being replanted, with some of Patricia's favourite plants remaining, but with new growth filling in the spaces where her rigid geometry had begun to crack. Marcus was there. Charles, his biological father, was there. Monica and James and their children were there. David and Charlotte, who had the good grace to be entirely gracious despite the fact that I was the ghost of David's past. and Robert's younger brother, who had never been part of the Devon inner circle, but who David wanted to honor after realizing how much the family had closed him out. We had dinner at a simple wooden table, 4 plates initially, just for me, David, Monica and Marcus, a moment that felt small but meant everything, not because we were suddenly a family, but because we were acknowledging that we had all survived the rupture of the lie. We had all looked at the truth and chosen to keep living, to keep trying, to keep building something real on the foundation of what Patricia had left behind. "I want to say something," David said after we'd eaten, after the children had been taken to watch a film in the other room. "I want to apologize to all of you, but particularly to Emilia. I spent our marriage running from my mother, trying to distance myself from her influence, and in doing that, I ended up treating the people I loved with the same coldness and distance that she modeled. I abandoned you when you needed me most, Emilia, and that's something I've had to accept about myself." "I forgive you," I said. "I'm not sure if it matters at this point, but I do. And I want to acknowledge," he continued, "that what Emilia did, telling us the truth about Marcus, was the right thing, even though it was devastating. She gave us all permission to stop living in a lie. She gave us all the possibility of becoming ourselves." Marcus raised his glass, to the truth, complicated as it is, and to the people brave enough to speak it. We drank to that, and then we ate dessert, and we talked about nothing important, and we were, for the first time, a family that was built on something real rather than something that needed to be defended at all costs. It wasn't perfect. Families born from truth rarely are, but it was authentic and it was honest, and it was better than anything we had before. Part 12, the epilogue. I'm 42 years old now. I'm chief of reconstructive surgery at St. Mary's Hospital. I'm still alone by choice in a way that doesn't feel lonely anymore. I have my work, which I love. I have friendships that are deep and real. I have a family, not the family I was born into and not the family I married into, but a family I've built with the people who have chosen to see me and accept me and love me anyway. Monica and I are close now in a way that is still being negotiated, still sometimes awkward but real. Her children call me Aunt Emilia. We have drinks every month. We text about books and marriages and parenting struggles. We have found in each other a kind of understanding that comes only from having survived the same particular damage. Marcus has built a thriving practice. His architecture is focused on creating spaces that heal, that honor the human need for beauty and function. He's introduced me to Charles, and Charles has treated me with a warmth that suggests he understands exactly what I did and why I did it. I've met Marcus's half-siblings, people who welcomed him back into their lives with generosity that restored some of his faith in family. David remarried again after Charlotte. He's happy, I think. We see each other occasionally at family events, and we're cordial in a way that suggests the heat of our failure has finally cooled into something like peace. Patricia's garden has been transformed. Some of her plants remain, but they're no longer constrained by the rigid geometry she insisted on. They're allowed to grow wild, to find their own shape. The hedge mazes are gone. In their place is a more open landscape that feels like breathing, not controlling. I think about Patricia frequently. I think about what her life might have been if she had chosen truth over protection, if she had chosen to become herself rather than to police everyone else's identities. I think about the fact that she died never knowing that her greatest act of cruelty, her determination to undermine my confidence and my marriage, ended up being the thing that freed both me and her son to become our authentic selves. Sometimes I wonder if she would have appreciated the irony. What I know for certain is this: the truth doesn't ask permission. It doesn't care about your timeline or your fear or your need to protect your narrative. The truth will find its way out, whether you guide it gently or fight it violently. And the people who spend their lives defending lies end up destroyed not by the truth itself, but by the effort of containing it. I'm not saying I'm glad that I revealed the DNA test. I'm not saying the destruction of the family was worth the revelation. I'm saying that I made a choice to stop being complicit in someone else's lie, and that choice set off a chain of events that was devastating and necessary, and ultimately redemptive. Patricia tried to make me small. She tried to convince me that my ambition was selfish, that my independence was wrong, that my refusal to diminish myself for someone else's comfort was a character flaw. For years, I believed her. For years, I tried to become someone else so that I could fit into the family that had rejected me. But I stopped believing her, and when I stopped believing her, I became free. My name is Emilia Clarke, and I am a surgeon. I am a woman who chose truth over comfort. I am someone who survived her mother-in-law's cruelty and came out the other side not as a victim, but as someone who understands the cost of living a lie. I am a person who gave my family the gift of truth, even though they didn't recognize it as a gift at first. And if you're waiting for your family to see you, stop waiting, see yourself first, the truth will take care of itself. If you're protecting someone else's lie, I'll tell you what I learned, the weight of that protection will eventually break you, it will break them, it will break everyone in the circle of silence. The only way to save the people you love is to let them live in the truth, even when the truth is devastating. I survived Patricia Devon because I eventually refused to be defined by her opinion of me. I survived my failed marriage because I discovered that my worth wasn't dependent on someone else's capacity to recognize it. I survived the revelation of a family secret because I believed that the truth, however painful, was better than the alternative. 4 plates, 1 table, a family that is imperfect but real. That's everything.